we part ways. You know, I leaked the document, I get fired, but she did take me into the White House right after I was fired. They let me hang around there a while, and I wrote Reagan, I wrote the president, 10-page letter, explained to him what had happened. It was a Marxist factory, the Department of Ed, and never had an answer. I know he got it. Never had an answer. I went down to Washington, D.C. to try to get an answer. I went to visit Ed Meese's office, and Ken Cribb was his assistant, and he patted me on the shoulder and he said, "Oh, Charlotte, aren't you glad the president read your letter?" And I said, "Not really." I said, "I want an answer. Because I can't go out and say President Reagan knows that this is a Marxist factory unless I have a letter from him saying, thank you for your letter." So what I'm trying to say, it is such a disappointment to go through these years of treason on the right. It's so weird. I used to fight the left. I don't even think about them anymore because the enemy is on the right. And for instance, the little book there, Back to Basics, I wanted it in the hands of every single parent in this country. And it could have been. It was only $5. And it was meant to be. And it called on bringing the Department of Ed down. When you read it, you'll see everything you're dealing with today. And if you can find anything that's not in that book you're dealing with, let me know. It could have been written tomorrow. I warned. It was boycotted across the board by every single major conservative organization in this country. A through Z. I tried to protect the Birchers even by not saying that up until recently. They wouldn't put it out. So I wouldn't ordinarily say this unless, and Retta knows, unless it is devastating. How many children have been lost since 1985 when I wrote that book that could have been saved? This country could have been saved from globalism. That's all in there too. Critical thinking, which is Marxism, that's in there too. Common Core, that's in there too. Everything you're dealing with now. And so as I did with Greta, I cry for the children. And especially the minorities that were used. Now you may wonder how I'm going to tell you how they were used. In 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act decided to put in the Carnegie Corporation's initial plan from 1934. Which was to use the schools to change America's capitalist economic system to a planned economy. That's in a little book at AmericanDeception.com. You can read it. It's called Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies. So that was the plan. Also in that little book, they talk about taking our land. Now Carnegie, every 5 years, put money in. Education Commission of the States. I mean, you've got these Common Core people being led, these poor parents being led now by Eagle Forum to contact the National Governors Association. They think they're going to get that woman who runs it to change her mind. Carnegie founded National Governors Association in 1910. They're all on board, right? So Carnegie, National Assessment. Common Core, that's National Assessment. We've had it since 1965. They keep changing the name. The only difference, and it's important, is that you've got the computers for education, IEPs. We've always had IEPs for special ed. IEPs, and you've got computer assessment, which is very, very dangerous because of the remediation. You know, they're giving it without the FERPA. You know, they're giving your individual student information to the corporations to design courseware for the computer, for the individual child, to constantly recycle the child until that child has the proper Marxist viewpoint. I will not use any other adjective but Marxist. We're not dealing with communism. We're not really dealing, it's not communitarianism. We're dealing with Marxism, communism. And Ronald Reagan signed the agreements with the Soviet Union with Gorbachev in 1985. At the same time, Carnegie signed the agreements to merge the two education systems. A lot of you have heard me talk about this stuff before. Norman Dodd, the official investigator for the congressional investigation of the tax-exempt foundations in 1953, was told by Rowan Gaither of the Ford Foundation that they got their instructions from the White House, and those instructions were to use their tax-exempt money to change America so it could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. So we're looking at all the way down. A school to work is a Soviet polytech system. Common Core, those standards came out of the Northwest Regional Lab in the early 70s. Those standards are the same. If you'll read them in my little book, extraordinary, because I got the original Northwest Regional Lab goals collection. I think 15,000 goals went out into every state. And most of them were values, attitudes, and beliefs. And that's why we've lost several generations of children. That's why I say I weep that that book never made it into the hands of every single parent in this country. Phyllis Schlafly, who I know very well. In fact, I wrote the book, Child Abuse in the Classroom, for her, although my name's not in it. I didn't used to say these things, but I'm so mad now that I do. But in that book, you know, that was the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment that we got. All the rotten programs, National Diffusion Network, out of my office to change your children's attitudes, values, and beliefs. And so Phyllis, when I wrote that little book, she got the word out. Well, she told us at a meeting, a forum meeting in Washington, D.C., she said, oh, she said this to the public, nobody's going to understand Charlotte's book. Well, there's the publisher of my big baby, which I wrote 700 pages later. How many years later? 10? 700 pages, not 39. The big baby might be difficult to understand, but Cindy Weatherly, the editor of the Big Baby, said to Phyllis about the little one, oh, Phyllis, she said, that's interesting because I live in Athens, Georgia, and she said, you know, the butcher down the street just loves that book. He understands it just fine. So I still didn't believe. I still worked with Phyllis. And then we were trying to go up against the Carnegie Corporation that signed the agreements with the Soviet Academy of Science to develop critical thinking courseware for early elementary school children with the Russians. Right? So I said to Phyllis, aren't you going to go up against Carnegie? You know what she said? Oh, Charlotte, I can't go up against the tax-exempt foundations. And I said, well, that means I have to? I guess so. So she has nothing to do with me. I'm opposed to school choice, tax-funded. I love any other. What's wrong with regular school choice? You pay. It's tough. You know, you have to write that check. So what I'm going to close this now because I'm not meant to be giving a great long speech, but what I'm going to say is that we are between a rock and a hard place. Very, very hard. And this is driving them all crazy because the gal who wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, 700 pages, is supposed to be the one person who knows that education, public education, is horrible. Well, I don't like it very much. I wouldn't have done that. But I'll tell you one thing. The rock is the Council on Foreign Relations, the Heritage Foundation, which drafted NAFTA, by the way. Interesting, huh? How many people know that? They drafted NAFTA, which has robbed our country of hundreds of thousands of good jobs. Well, of course they need school choice. They need charter schools with unelected boards. So they can put your children to work like slaves. No school boards. Charter schools have no school boards, right? If you give tax money to any private education entity, including homeschoolers, you will be controlled. And that's not just Charlotte talking, that's my sort of enemy, William Bennett, who even had to admit to homeschoolers when they asked him about his virtual academy, charter school, And they said, Secretary Bennett, what's the test? Our homeschool children. Oh, the federal test. They have to take the NAEP. 60% politically correct. You know what that means? UN Agenda 21, all the most deviant sex ed, everything. You have to take 60% of the NAEP. People talk about Common Core. Of course it's bad. We've had it with the NAEP since 1965. I'm going to tell you something. If you don't believe me, in 1970, we had comprehensive health education in Maine. And I found it. It was called the Berkeley model. Very appropriate, huh? California. And one of the standards, or whatever criteria, or objectives was, at least it was ninth graders, not kindergarten. Those students had to understand the 3 types of sexual intercourse, including with animals. And parents think Common Core is bad? No. They've taken, the conservatives have taken the Common Core issue and gone with it and funded it and gone across the country with buses. And even a guy in the restaurant, we were at Antoine's, my dear host took me to Antoine's. The waiter there said to me, oh yeah, he said, have you heard of Common Core? And I thought, oh, Heritage, good for you and all of your neocon Trotskyite money grubbing, taking the money from the old ladies to keep you alive, huh? Look what they've done. In 1990, Anita Hogue, myself, all of us were fighting the national assessment. We had $1,000 a month phone bills. We didn't get a penny from one single conservative organization in our country to fight that battle. Ask yourself, why now? All of a sudden, the conservative organizations funding the parents to stop the Common Core because they want to keep them diverted from what? The Trojan horse. Tax-funded school choice, and the key here is unelected boards. The unelected form of government. If we allow the second largest item in the U.S. budget after defense in discretionary terms, education, to be taken over by unelected boards, what's to keep us from going boom, 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 all the way down the line, and we'll have no elected form of government. And that's the goal, because Willard Garvey, head of the Love Box Company about 20 years ago in Kansas, I think, wrote a letter to Ronald Reagan saying it's time for us to think about the use of computers for voting. We don't have to vote anymore. These people are bad. And they're in bed, NEA's in bed with, the NEA's in bed with Rockefeller, if you get into the details. The NEA's in bed with all the conservatives. So I don't like to say this, and you all may think it took me an awfully long time to wake up, huh? Good for you, you woke up, boom. It took me certainly 20 years. I didn't want to admit this. I didn't want to admit that this is what they had done, what the neoconservatives had done, because prior to Reagan, we had the Goldwater conservatives. They were great. Since then, we've had nothing. They came out of the Democratic Party, these so-called conservatives, call them Trotskyites, call them what you want, and they believe in gradualism. It's really like the British Fabianism. And if we stick with that, we can't win. The battle is no longer between the right and the left. The battle is between us Americans against both of them. And we have to move forward, and this is the most beautiful event for me. I can't tell you, I'm not allowed to speak in Maine. I mean, really, it's a totally totalitarian. We've got a Republican conservative governor. When he went in, he called me the day before, asked me why I was upset about charter schools, and I said, Governor, you know, there's no difference between a charter school and a public school except one thing. The charter school doesn't have an elected board. It's a public school without an elected school board. And he said to me, oh, well, we'll just have to do something about that. And I said, well, you know, if you do, you're just going to be back right where you are. So let me point out right here, I'm going to say, I almost forgot. That's the rock, CFR,